isolation of the West Virginia mountains, something she once found comforting, would become the very thing that sealed her fate. Briar Ridge was the kind of place people drove past without noticing, a narrow, winding strip of cracked asphalt carved along the mountainside like a careless scratch. Only a handful of residents lived there year-round, clinging to land that had been passed down through generations, long before the mines closed and the younger folks moved away. The Carver cabin sat at the third bend, just above the tree line, where fog rolled in like something alive. It never truly lifted, even in summer. Locals said the hollows held shadows differently, keeping them longer than they should, as if the land itself resented letting anything go. Emily had moved there 2 years earlier to escape the noise of Charleston, trading city convenience for quiet mornings, cheap land, and the comfort of being close to nature. She worked remotely as a medical billing specialist, spending her days in front of a laptop, her evenings tending to the small vegetable garden behind the cabin, and her nights curled up with a book while the wind howled outside. She wasn't running from anything, at least not in the way outsiders might assume. Emily loved solitude, needed it, cherished it. But solitude is a fragile thing. All it takes is one uninvited presence to fracture it beyond repair. The first sign of trouble, though small and almost forgettable, began 2 months before the night everything went wrong. Emily reported hearing footsteps behind her cabin at odd hours, light, deliberate steps that crunched the frost-covered leaves. She dismissed it at first as wildlife, deer, raccoons, maybe even a black bear passing through. But on several occasions, she noticed the footsteps stopped abruptly, as though someone or something was watching. When she'd open the back door to check, there would be nothing but trees swaying in the cold. She told a coworker during a virtual meeting that she sometimes felt like she wasn't alone out there. The coworker laughed, assuming she was joking. Emily laughed along, even though she didn't find it funny. As the weeks passed, small disturbances became harder to ignore. Tools from her shed went missing. Her mailbox was left open several mornings in a row. The garden gate would be unlatched, swinging gently in the wind. She chalked it all up to forgetfulness. She had been working long hours after all. Remote work made the days blur together, and the isolation could easily play tricks on the mind. But Emily wasn't forgetful, and the disturbances weren't tricks. On the morning of January 9th, 3 days before the night on Briar Ridge, a light dusting of snow revealed something impossible to ignore. Footprints circling her cabin. Not animal tracks, human ones. Deep, crisp imprints that traveled the entire perimeter of her home, stopping repeatedly near windows. The footprints led in from the dense woods behind her property, but didn't lead back out. They simply vanished near the tree line, as if the person responsible had waited, watching her for hours, hidden by the pines and fog. Emily took photos of the tracks with her phone, but didn't contact police. She didn't want to overreact. Living alone can heighten every sound, every shadow. She told herself that maybe it was a hunter who got too close, or a trespasser passing through. People cut corners through private land all the time in the mountains. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't necessarily sinister. But Briar Ridge had changed in recent years. Opioids had seeped into the region like poison in groundwater, bringing with them desperate individuals and petty crime. Sheriff's deputies were stretched thin, covering several miles of steep terrain where cell signal was inconsistent at best. Some locals fought to keep their land from being overtaken by squatters who drifted from abandoned mine camps. Others simply ignored the problem, fearful of drawing attention to themselves. Whatever had made those footprints, Emily told herself, was probably just someone passing through. She would buy better locks, install a motion light, maybe even get a dog. But it was already too late. By the night of January 12th, the mountains seemed to sense what was coming. The temperature plummeted faster than predicted, coating the ridge in black ice. The wind carried an unnatural stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Even the usual sounds, the creaking branches, distant coyote calls, were smothered under the weight of the cold. Emily spent that day finishing a billing report for her supervisor. Around 6 p.m., she made herself a bowl of vegetable soup and settled on the living room couch, wrapped in a fleece blanket. Her cabin, though small, felt safe, warm, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. She didn't know that only yards away, beyond the reach of her porch light, someone was standing completely still, watching her through the window. It would be hours before the first crime scene photo was taken, before investigators would see the evidence of how thoroughly she had been hunted. They would later piece together a timeline based on broken branches, the angle of footprints in the snow, and the chilling knowledge that the intruder had waited for the perfect moment. At 11:17 p.m., that moment arrived. The power flickered once, then twice. Emily looked up from her book, startled by the sudden darkness that washed over the room. The cabin hummed faintly as the refrigerator sputtered to silence. She sighed, annoyed, but not alarmed. Power outages were common in the mountains during cold snaps. She reached for her phone, only to find it at 3% battery. What investigators would later find most chilling was not that the power had gone out, but why it had gone out. The power line feeding Emily's cabin had not snapped from ice or wind. It had been cut, deliberately severed several yards from the cabin where the trees grew thickest. The cut was clean, almost surgical. Whoever had been watching her knew exactly where the line was, knew the hours she worked, knew her routines, knew that without power, the cabin became defenseless. Emily lit a candle, its glow casting nervous shadows across the wooden walls. She moved from room to room, checking windows, reassuring herself that everything was fine. But each window reflected the same thing, pure, suffocating darkness outside. She didn't see the figure standing at the edge of the yard, blending into the black. The intruder was patient, silent, completely unhurried. The first sound Emily heard came at 11:22 p.m., barely noticeable, but distinct enough to draw her attention. A faint, rhythmic tapping on the side of the cabin, like knuckles rushing lightly against the wood. She froze, trying to pinpoint the direction. The tapping came again, softer this time, almost teasing. Her throat tightened. Every instinct in her body screamed that she wasn't alone. She grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and shined it toward the nearest window. Nothing. She checked the deadbolt twice, though she knew it was locked. The tapping moved, shifting to the back of the cabin, tapping in a slow, deliberate pattern. Investigators later noted that the sound Emily heard was likely the intruder dragging a gloved finger along the siding, testing how much she could hear, testing her fear. Emily stood perfectly still, listening. The tapping stopped, but that wasn't a relief. It was the worst thing that could have happened. Silence meant movement. Silence meant repositioning. At 11:30 p.m., Emily finally reached for her phone, intending to call 911, despite the weak signal on the ridge. She saw the screen flash red as the last battery percentage drained. The phone went dead. She was alone, in darkness, without power, without a signal, without anyone nearby for miles. And somewhere outside, someone was watching, waiting, deciding when to make their move. The final minutes before the break-in would later be described by investigators as textbook predator behavior. Whoever targeted Emily knew fear was part of the process. They knew isolation was their greatest weapon. At 11:34 p.m., Emily heard the soft crunch of snow outside her bedroom window. At 11:35 p.m., she heard slow breathing on the other side of the wall. At 11:36 p.m., the doorknob to her back entrance moved, just once, testing. And at 11:37 p.m., the doorknob turned again, this time harder. The intruder had chosen his moment. Fear tightened every muscle in Emily's body as she pressed her back against the far wall of the hallway, the candle flickering desperately in her shaking hand. And then at 11:38 p.m., the back door splintered open.